Over the past few years, I've taken on a lot of different responsibilities, from being a missionary to a full-time college student taking 23 credits while working a part-time job, to getting married, having my first kid, and now working a 9 to 5 job, while trying to take care of my family and balance that with being productive in my free time and working towards my passion. And so I've had to learn different skills for balancing all these different responsibilities while continuing to make progress towards my goals. I'll be honest, I've found myself struggling at times, and I found myself in this cycle, which I think a lot of people can relate to, where you have these responsibilities and they take up a lot of energy. They can cause a lot of stress, and then in your free time, you find yourself just coping and relaxing, coping with that stress, and that feels good, and it just makes you want to continue to do that in your free time. And then this is what I've found myself trapped in that cycle before, where I'm not making progress in my free time. I'm not working towards what I'm passionate about because I'm just trying to just deal with the stress I'm experiencing. And so in this video, I want to talk about one overarching principle to balance these different responsibilities, and then just a few specific tips when it comes to these different things like school, family, work, for being productive. And so the overarching principle I want to share is really dealing with stress in a positive, healthy way. And so there's a few different parts to this. Number one, I think, is figuring out how you deal with stress in the moment, so that you don't turn to instant gratification to cope. I've found myself, when I get stressed at work, I work as a crisis counselor, so I can have very stressful calls, people who might be upset at me, and I can find myself turning to YouTube or Instagram to just distract myself from what I just experienced. And if I do that, it really messes with my motivation and dopamine later. And so I've had to learn, okay, how do I actually process what just happened? And so for me, I try to take a moment, just take some deep breaths, and sort of reframe what happened. I can try to tell myself, it's not personal. These people have a lot going on. I'm safe. They're not going to do anything to me. It's okay. I'm going to keep my job. I'm going to be able to provide for my family. And these sorts of things help me to sort of ground myself and process and deal with that stress so that it doesn't just linger inside of me. I like to do something similar at the end of the workday so that I deal with any of that lingering stress that I've sort of built up throughout the workday, so that I can, instead of just coping after my job is done, really work on things that I care about, or spending time with my family and being present for that. Another really important thing for myself when it comes to dealing with stress is doing so proactively by taking care of my physical body, because I've noticed when I take care of my physical health, I deal with stress much better. So for me, this is making sure to get exercise, making sure to prioritize sleep as much as possible, as well as healthy eating. And so these three proactive things with physical health help me to deal with stress and make it so I don't just cope in my free time. And instead, I can work on things that I really care about. Now, I want to share some specific tools when it comes to each of these responsibilities that you might have. And I'll start with having a partner, or in my case, my wife, and how we work together to make sure that we're both working towards our goals and managing our time effectively. And this also has to do with dealing with stress, because one of the biggest things that helps us is having a time set apart where we meet together once a week, and we talk about those conversations that might be a little bit harder to have throughout the week, things that come up. And during this meeting, we talk about our upcoming week, how we're going to spend our time and work towards our goals. Allows us to keep each other accountable and also set expectations for, okay, this is when we're going to spend time together. This is when we're going to each individually work on our goals. And so it helps us to stay aligned, helps us to proactively work on things instead of arguments coming up randomly, which allows us to keep that stress down as well. I think the more that we have a routine that we stick to, the less stressed I feel and the more progress I feel I make towards my goals. Now, when it comes to having a 9 to 5 job or going to school, there are a few different tips that help you be productive if you're trying to work towards other goals. So, of course, you need to do what you're required to do for your job, but you can also work towards different things if you have spare or free time. So in my case, I'm a crisis counselor, like I said, so I take calls throughout the day, but I have time in between those calls, and instead of just spending that mindlessly scrolling or watching a show, I spend that time learning about things that I'm passionate about, like psychology and changing habits, and I can spend that time working towards my other goals. And I feel like most people can do this to some degree in their job and to some degree if they're a student in school. And so I did this so much when I was at school. There were a lot of classes that I had to take that didn't really pertain so much to the degree I was pursuing. And so I did the minimum effort required to pass those classes, and then I spent more of my time working and learning about the things that I really cared about, including during class. If the lecture was unimportant but I had to be there for attendance, I spent that time learning on my iPad and creating different things. And when it comes to having a 9 to 5 or going to school, it's also important to think about when you do your best work, because when you're trying to be productive and work towards different goals, it's been extremely important for me to find a time where I can do what's called like deep work, where you really sit down for a block of time where you can just focus on that thing and really dive into it. For a lot of people, that time is in the morning because that's when our dopamine is highest, because it's replenished overnight, and so you're going to feel really motivated to work towards your goals. While some people may find that it's best for them to set that time aside after work or at night. For me, I like to do it in the morning, but you can figure out when your best time is and make sure to create time for that so that you feel like you're making progress every day. Now, the biggest responsibility that I've taken on recently is having a child. My wife and I had a child about 10 months ago, and it's been the most amazing thing. We love him so much, and also it's changed our time management drastically, and so I have very little time just to myself, and so I make sure to, when I have time to myself, that I'm working on things that I really care about. And I think it's very important for me to have one-on-one time with my son, and I found that I have time for that, and I also have an abundance of it, and so I spend some of that time also doing things like exercising or cooking with my son, so that when I have time by myself, I can use that. Instead of exercising or cooking, I spend that time working on things that I'm really passionate about and need to focus on. And so my final now, even with doing this, since having a child, my progress towards some of my goals have slowed a lot, and that's been hard. But I've realized that we all go through different seasons in life, and in this season, I've spent more time taking care of my family and just being with them. And as soon as I kind of realized that and lowered my expectations for working towards my others' goals, I was able to enjoy life a lot more and be more present. And I think it's okay to have those different seasons, and also to continue to set aside time, even if it's just a small amount each day, as I've tried to set aside time to continue to make progress. It brings me a lot of satisfaction knowing I'm continuing to do that while I'm also taking care of my family and being with them. And so I hope this helps you if you're trying to balance different responsibilities while trying to be productive in your free time. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. I'll read them all and respond. And if you're looking for a specific plan when it comes to trying to balance these things or overcome addictive habits that might be keeping you from being productive, then you can click the link in the description and we can have a chat sometime.